Part 2 of The Seed of the Toc Toc Birds by Francis Flagg. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Seed of the Toc Toc Birds by Francis Flagg. Part 2. Such was the amazing story Milton Baxter told the Senate, but that body placed little credence in it. In times of stress and disaster, cranks and men of vivid imaginations and little mental stability inevitably spring up. But the Washington correspondents wired the story to their papers, and the Associated Press broadcast it to the four winds. Talbot had just returned to Phoenix from New Mexico. He had been out of touch with civilization and newspapers, and it was with a feeling of stunned amazement that he learned of the evacuation of Tucson and Winkleman and the wiping out of Oracle. Reading Milton Baxter's incredible story, he leapt to his feet with an oath. "Toc toc!" Why, that was the sound the strange birds had uttered in the hills back of Oracle, and there was the noise of machinery coming from the old shaft. Full of excitement, he lost no time in seeking an interview with the military commander whose headquarters were located in Phoenix, and related to him what Manuel and himself had witnessed and heard that day at the abandoned mine. Manuel corroborated his tale. The commander was more than troubled and doubtful. "God knows we cannot afford to pass up an opportunity of wiping out the enemy. If you will indicate on a map where the old shaft is, we will bomb it from the air." Talbot shook his head. "Your planes would have a tough job hitting a spot as small as that from the air. Besides, a direct hit might only close up the shaft and not destroy the workings underground. If the enemy be the creatures Milton Baxter says they are, what is to prevent them from digging their way out and resuming the attack? Then we will land troops there somehow and overwhelm them with—" Talbot interrupted. "Pardon me, General, but the enemy would have no difficulty in spotting such a maneuver. What chance would your soldiers have against a shower of jungle seed? You would only be sending them to destruction. No, the only way is for someone familiar with those underground diggings to enter them, locate the birds and the machines, and blow them up." "But who?" "Myself. Listen, this is the plan. About 5 years ago, my company mined for copper and other ores about half-mile above the Wiley claim. I was in charge of operations. That is how I know the ground so well. One of our northern leads broke through into a tunnel of the abandoned mine. When copper prices were shot to hell in the Depression of 1930, we quit taking out ore. But when I went through the place 18 months ago, it was still possible to crawl from one mine to another. And of course, earth and rock may have fallen since then, but I don't believe the way is yet blocked. If I were dropped in that vicinity at night with another man and the necessary tools and explosives—" The General thought swiftly. "An auto-gyroscope could land you all right. There's one here now. But what about the second man to accompany you?" Manuel said quickly, "I'm going with the boss." "You, Manuel," Talbot said roughly. "Don't be a fool. If anything should happen to me, well, I've lived my life. But you're only a kid." Manuel's face set stubbornly. "An experienced mining man you need, is it not? In case there should be difficulties. And I am experienced. Besides, senors," he said simply, "my wife and child are somewhere in those mountains, above Oracle." Talbot gripped his hand in quick sympathy. "All right, Manuel. Come if you like." A moonless sky hung above them as they swung over the dark and jungle-engulfed deserted city of Tucson, a sky blazing with the clarity of desert stars, and to the south and west shot through with the beams of great searchlights. Flying at a lofty altitude to avoid contact with drifting globes or betrayal of their coming with no lights showing aboard their craft, save those carefully screened and focused on the instrument board, it was hard to realize that the fate of America, perhaps the world, hung on the efforts of two puny individuals. Everything seemed unreal, ghost-like, and suddenly the strangeness of it all came over Talbot, and he felt afraid. The noiseless engine made scarcely a sound. The distant rumble of gunfire sounded like low and muttered thunder. They had come by way of Tucson so as to pick up a 10-gallon tube of concentrated explosive gas at the military camp in the Tucson mountains. "This gas," the General had assured them, "has been secretly developed by the chemical branch of the War Department, and is more powerful than TNT or nitroglycerin. It is odorless, harmless to breathe, and exploded by a wireless radio device." It showed them how to manipulate the radio device, and explained that in the metal tube was a tiny chamber from which gas could not escape, and a receiving detonating cap. If you can introduce the tube into the underground galleries where you suspect the enemy's headquarters to be, allow the contents to escape for 10 minutes, and a mile distant you can blow the mine and all in it to destruction. And you needn't be afraid of anything escaping alive," it added grimly. Talbot thought of his words as the dark and silent world slid by. He glanced at the luminous dial of his wristwatch. 11:15. The moon rose at 11:24. He studied the map. High over Mount Lemon the craft soared. He touched the army pilot's arm. "All right," he said. "Throttle her down." Their speed decreased. Lower. Swiftly they sank, until the dark bulk of hills and trees lay blackly beneath, so near as to seem within the touch of a hand. Though he strained his ears, no alien sound came wafting upward. "Keep circling here," he directed the pilot. "The moon will be up in a minute, and then we can be sure of where we are." The pilot nodded. He was a phlegmatic young man. Not once during the trip had he uttered a word. The east glowed as if with red fire. Many a time before had Talbot watched the moon rise, but never under stranger circumstances. Now the night was illuminated with mellow glory. "Hit the nail on the head," he whispered. "Do you see that spot over there?" "To the left, yes." "Can you land us there?" Without a word, the pilot swung for the clearance. It was a close thing, requiring delicate manoeuvring, and only an autogyroscope could have made it without crashing. Hurriedly, Manuel and Talbot unloaded their gear. "All right," said Talbot to the pilot. "No need to wait for us. If we are successful, we'll send out the wireless signal agreed on. And if we aren't—" he shrugged his shoulders. "But tell the General to be sure and allow us the time stipulated on before undertaking another attack." Standing there, on the bleak hillside, watching the autogyroscope run ahead for a few yards, and then take the air, Talbot experienced a feeling of desolation. Now he and Manuel were alone, cut off from their own kind by barriers of impregnable jungle. And yet, on that lonely hillside, there were no signs of an enemy. For a moment he wondered if he weren't asleep, dreaming. If he wouldn't soon awake to find that all this was nothing but a nightmare. But Manuel, gathering up the tools, roused him from such thoughts. Not without difficulty were the necessary things conveyed to the abandoned mine back of the old Wiley claim. Their course lay along the bottom of a dry creek over a ridge, and so to the shaft halfway down the side of a hill. A second trip had to be made to bring the gas tube. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when Manuel stood at the foot of the 400-foot hole and signalled up that the air was good. Talbot lowered the tools to him, and the gas container, and lastly went down himself. As already stated, Talbot had explored the underground workings of the mine not 18 months before. Picking out the main tunnel, and keeping a close watch for rattlers with electric torches, the two men went cautiously ahead. In places earth had fallen and had to be cleared away, but the formation for the most part was a soft rock and shale. They went slowly, for fear of starting slides. At a spot taking an abrupt turn, and it was here that the newer tunnel had broken through into the older gallery of the Wiley claim, Manuel caught swiftly at Talbot's arm. "What is that?" To straining ears came the unmistakable throb of machinery. They snapped off their torches and crouched in Stygian darkness. Not a ray of light was to be seen. Talbot knew that in following the ore stratum, the Wiley gallery took several twists. Laboriously, he and Manuel advanced with the gas tube. It was stiflingly close. He counted the turns, 1, 2, 3. Now the roar of machinery was a steady reverberation that shook the tunnel. He whispered to Manuel, "Go back and wait for me at the mouth of the shaft. Only one of us must risk taking the gas tube any nearer the enemy. Here, take my watch. It is now 2:45. If I don't rejoin you by 4 o'clock, touch off the explosive." Manuel started to protest. "Do as I say," commanded Talbot. "The fate of the world is at stake. Give me an hour, but no longer. Remember." Left alone in the clammy darkness, Talbot wiped the sweat from his face. Grabbing one end of the rope sling in which the tube was fastened, he pulled it ahead. There was a certain amount of unavoidable noise. Rock rattled. Earth fell. But he reasoned shrewdly enough that the roar of the machinery would drown this. Beyond a crevice created by a cave-in, he saw an intense light play weirdly. He squirmed through the crevice and pulled the tube after him. His mind reconstructed the mine ahead. He recollected that when the lead of this mine had petered out, the owners had begun to sink the shaft deeper into the earth before abandoning the mine. This meant that the foot of the shaft, with the addition of an encroaching 20 feet to the southern gallery, was deeper by some several yards than the foot of the tunnel in which he stood. Here was the logical place to set the gas tube, nose pointed ahead. With trembling fingers, he loosened the screwed-in nose of the tube with a wrench. A slight hiss told of the deadly gas's escape. It would inevitably flow towards the shaft, drawn by the slight suction of machinery, following the easiest direction of expansion. Now Talbot's work was done, and, if he had immediately retreated, all would have been well. But the weird light fascinated him. Here he was, one man in the bowels of earth, pitting his strength, his ingenuity, against something incredible, unbelievable. Beings from an atomic universe, from a world buried within the atom, beings attacking his own Earth with uncanny methods of destruction. Oh, it was impossible. Absurd. But he must look at them. He must see. Scarcely daring to breathe, he squirmed, he crawled, and suddenly he saw. He was looking down into an underground crypt flooded with brilliant light. That crypt had been altered out of all recognition, its greater expanse of roof supported with massive pillars, the light screening away from the shaft. But it was not all this which riveted his staring eyes. No, it was the machines, strange, twisted things, glowing, pulsing, and, in the light of his knowledge, menacing and sinister. Talbot gasped. Almost at once he observed the birds, 12 of them, 2 standing in front of what appeared to be a great square of polished crystal, wearing metal caps and goggles, heads cocked forward intently. The others also perched in front of odd machines like graven images. That was the uncanny thing about the birds. They appeared to be doing nothing. Only the occasional jerk of a head, the filming of a hard golden eye, gave them a semblance of life. But nonetheless, there could be no mistaking the fact that they were the guiding, the directing geniuses back of all the pulsing, throbbing mechanisms. Half mesmerized by the sight, forgetful of time and place, Talbot leaned forward in awe. There was a great funnel, a shallow cabinet, and out of the cabinet poured an intense reddish beam, and out of the beam... It was a minute before he understood, and then comprehension came to him. Those dark spots shooting from the cabinet, no larger than peas, were the mysterious drifting globes whose scattered seed was fast covering miles of Arizonian soil with impenetrable jungle. From a universe in a piece of matter no larger than a pinhead, from a sub-atomic world, the weapons of an alien intelligence were ruthlessly being hurled against man, to conquer, to destroy him. And now it was made plain to him why the drifting globes had seemed to materialize out of thin air. Being infinitesimally small parts of an atom, these globes were released from the cabinet and soon assumed the size of peas. They were guided across the crypt, up the old Wiley shaft, and high in the air, somewhere in space, enlarged to immense proportions. How? Talbot could not guess. By some manipulation of science and machinery beyond that of Earth. Engrossed, he moved an inch forward, craned his head, and, in that moment, it happened. Beneath his weight, a section of earth and rock crumbled, cracked, slid forward, and he plunged headlong to the floor below, striking his skull with stunning force. He came to himself, staring up into the dour-looking face of a tall man. He recollected pitching forward amongst the birds and the machines. But the birds and the machines had disappeared, and he was lying in an odd room without windows but lit with a soft radiance. Bewildered, he sat up. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man's beard looked straggly, untrimmed. "My name," he said, "is Rubens. Professor Rubens." "Professor Rubens!" Talbot gasped. "Not the scientist who disappeared?" "Yes, as you've disappeared." "What?" "Through the machine." It was a moment before Talbot understood. "You mean—" "That you are a prisoner in a sub-atomic world." Talbot now realized with startling clearness what had happened to him. When he had fallen into the crypt, the weird birds had directly placed him in the cabinet and transported him to their own world. In other words, he and Rubens and everything he saw about him were infinitely small creatures in an atomic world. He and the Professor were trapped. And when Manuel blew up the only means of return. "How long have I been here?" Talbot asked hoarsely. 5 minutes at the most. Then, at the shortest, the way to Earth would exist 20 minutes longer. 20 minutes. Incoherently, he told Rubens of what had happened in Arizona since his disappearance, of his own misadventure. "Aye," said the Professor, "I knew as much. Nor do these inhuman birds intend stopping with the use of seed globes. More devilish weapons than that they plan using against Earth. Oh, they are fiends. Fiends. Already have they wiped out civilization and intelligent life on other planets in this subatomic system and introduced their own." He stopped, shuddering. "Nor is it to be wondered that no birds were seen after the first attack on Oracle," he went on. "They do not fight in person, as do we ourselves, but through proxy, directing machines from centers of control. In powers of destruction they are immeasurably ahead of man. Thank God you discovered their headquarters in the deserted mine and have spread the gas for its destruction. But the rage of the birds at such a defeat will be terrible. They will, undoubtedly, torture me in an effort to make me reveal the basis of my invention so that they can resume the attack on Earth. So we must escape. But how? Where? I've thought that out. It is 1 chance in 1,000. Undoubtedly we will be killed. But that is better than being tortured or living in this world. Look." He held up a pearl-handled penknife. "The birds are smart all right, but they don't understand clothes, wearing none themselves. They found your revolver, but overlooked this. Of what good is it? To cut our way out of this cell." Talbot laughed incredulously. The walls of the room were smooth and hard to the touch. "They're solid as concrete," he said, "but cut like cheese under a steel blade. I found that out. Watch." To Talbot's amazement, the point of the penknife sank into the wall, and in a moment a section of it was gouged out. The Professor said tensely, "I've been months in this place, been taken back and forth, and know the lay of the land. This room is in a great building that houses the laboratory from which the attack against Earth is being launched. Would you believe it? Only the great scientist who picked up my messages and helped me perfect my invention, and a few of his assistants, are concerned with that attack, and they'll be congregated at the machines. Follow me, and whatever I command, do it promptly." The Professor had been working feverishly as he spoke, and now he and Talbot crawled through the hole he had made in the wall and found themselves in a long, gloomy corridor. "Quick!" Rubens whispered. They darted down the passageway. Talbot had only time to see that the gleaming sides of the corridor were beveled and etched with strange designs. Before they came to its end, where a curious device like a huge 5-pointed star was revolving noiselessly, half sunk in a great hole in the floor. Without hesitation, the Professor stepped onto one of the flat-tipped star points as it came level with where they stood, and Talbot did the same. Up turned the star point to a dizzy height, and over, but the tip swung on ball bearings, maintaining its passages in a perpendicular position, and from the highest point of elevation descended to another floor far below, where they disembarked. The huge revolving star wheel was nothing but an ingenious movable staircase, but the Professor gave Talbot no time to marvel, nor did the latter try to linger. The corridor below was wider, more richly beveled and carved, and the statue of a heroic bird stood perched in the centre of it. The lighting was soft and mellow, but Talbot could perceive no windows or globes. Suddenly, from an open doorway hopped a bird. There was no chance to avoid it. Its wings were spread, and from its parted bill came a harsh cry. "Toc! Toc! Toc! Toc!" Knife in one hand, the Professor hurled himself forward and caught the bird in the grip of the other. Instantly, from the doorway sprang a monstrous mechanism on stilts. Flexible tentacles of metal reaching out and wrapping themselves around the Professor. Talbot leaped to the Professor's assistance. The mechanism fought like a live thing. In vain he strove to wrench the tentacles free of the Professor. One of them lashed out and took him by the thighs in a crushing grasp. But the Professor had the bird by the throat. Both of his hands were free. Back he forced its head, back. The mechanism seemed to falter in the attack as if bewildered. Across the exposed throat the Professor drew the gleaming blade. Flesh, tendons, and arteries gave, blood spurted, and in the same moment the tentacles fell away from Talbot and the Professor, and withdrew with a dull clang. The Professor released the bird, and it dropped to the floor. "It is the bird's mentality that directs those mechanisms," said the Professor, pointing to the now harmless machine. Apparently the brief but terrific battle had passed unnoticed, no alarm being given. Now the corridor twisted. The two men came to where a deep well was sunk in the floor. To one side a star wheel revolved smoothly. Out of the depths came the steady throb of machinery. Cautiously peering over the edge, Talbot saw a sight he would never forget. He did not need the Professor's whispered words to tell him that here was the source of the deadly attack being waged against Earth. Motionless birds perched in front of bizarre machines. Lights waxed and waned. A cannon-like device or funnel shot a column of light into a screen, and through the column of light moved a steady procession of round objects the size of plums. "The drifting globes being shot through to Earth," whispered the Professor, "and our only hope. Listen, the birds are intent on their machines, their backs to the star wheel. We will descend, throw ourselves into the column of light, seize hold of the globe, and—" He did not need to finish. Talbot understood in a flash. They would be dragged to their own world by the weapons hurled at it. "Of course, that column of light may kill us," went on the Professor tensely. "Or we may be blown up on the other side. Your Mexican friend hasn't touched off that explosive gas yet for we've not a moment to lose. Follow me." The tip of the star wheel went up, over, descended. The blood was roaring in Talbot's ears. "Now!" hissed the Professor. "Now!" Together they rushed forward. Talbot's foot slipped. The heart leaped into his throat. He never remembered reaching the column of light, but suddenly he was in it, blinded, dazed. His clutching hand closed on something small and hard. The laboratory was a pinwheel going round and round. Through a sea of darkness he floated. A distant glow grew, expanded, became the crypt in the old Wiley mine. A moment he glimpsed the gleaming pillars, the pulsing machines, the startled birds, and then, it was incredible, impossible, but the dark crumbling walls of the old shaft were around him. The globe in his hand, no larger than a pea, was lifting him towards life and safety. He wanted to shout, to sing, but even as the pale stars fell athwart his upturned face, even as the cool mountain air smote his fevered brow, the dark earth erupted beneath his feet. A whirlwind of smoke and wind beat and buffeted him, and in the midst of an overwhelming noise, consciousness was blotted out. It was bright daylight when Talbot regained his senses. Propped against a great rock, the Professor regarded him whimsically. Rubens looked badly bruised and battered. One arm hung loosely at his side. Talbot's head ached, and he knew that a leg was broken. "Yes," said the Professor, "we got through just in time. A few seconds before the explosive gas was touched off. Thank God! My invention has been destroyed. The world is safe." Yes, the world was safe. Talbot sank back with a sigh of relief. Overhead, a white plane was dipping towards Earth. End of Part 2, and end of The Seed of the Toc Toc Birds by Francis Flagg. Read by Adam Wybreak.